Good afternoon, everybody, to another of our GSHPA webinars. This is now the 26th in the series that we launched earlier this year. Today's topic is open loop boreholes, open loop ground source heat pumps and water source heat pumps, GSHPs and WSHPs. And the speaker today is John Findlay of Carbon Zero Consulting. John is a council member of the Ground Source Heat Pump Association and is a professional hydrogeologist who's now been involved with water source and ground source heat pumps for about 20 years. He has had a long and active engagement with the Ground Source Heat Pump Association. He's one-time chairman. And one of the things that he's very helpful with is the liaising for the Ground Source Heat Pump Association with both the Environment Agency in the UK and the appropriate agencies in Scotland and Wales, and also liaising with the British Geological Society over their engagement with ground source. John is going to address some of the regulatory issues associated with ground source, but that primarily comes in water source heat pumps. And I've dried up, and over to you, John.
Yep, thank you, Robin. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm John Findlay. I gave a webinar a couple of months ago on the general sort of principles of open loop systems. I'm now here today to talk to you about the regulation of them. So that's open loop borehole systems and just a bit on water source heat pump systems as well, although I think it probably deserves a webinar of its own. So those are briefly the topics where I'm going to talk about this afternoon. You know, which systems are regulated, the current regulatory system, the typical sort of regulatory process for a borehole project or water source project, some typical timeframes. Just one slide with a few points on water source heat pumps. A quick look at the system in Scotland, which is a bit different to how it is in England and Wales, and importantly, what the changes might be over the next 2 or 3 years to the current system for regulating open loop systems. So, which systems are regulated? I think it's important to say straight away that this is about open loop systems, but it's generally about larger open loop systems. It's only those that abstract take more than 20 meters cubed, that's 20,000 liters a day from the ground, are regulated. And in Scotland it's a bit different. So we're only talking about really sort of very large domestic or most sort of commercial and public building systems. So yeah, open loop systems above that abstraction limit are included in regulation. Closed loop borehole systems are not. Sometimes very large ones get caught up in with the Environment Agency, but that's only through the planning process. Small sort of horizontal shallow ground source systems are not regulated, and we're going to talk about water source systems later on. But again, that's only the larger ones of those which are regulated. So, the current regulation of open loop abstraction and re-injection of water. I've shown a square peg and a round hole there. I think that sums it up. Abstraction of water, so taking groundwater from a borehole, is covered by the 1991 Water Resources Act. It's been amended a few times, but it's basically 30-year-old regulation. So you need a license to take water out of the ground above 20 cube a day, and then if you want to re-inject that back into the ground, like you do with the vast majority of open loop ground source systems, re-injection is covered by the 2016 Water Quality Environmental Permit Regulations. So two very different things. One's water resources, one's water quality. So you need a license to take water out and you need a permit to put it back in again. Not a straightforward fit. And it does cause, it creates work, let's say, and it, as we'll see later, it all takes time. But I think it's important to say straight away that although the regulations in some ways get in the way, the UK's regulators, that's the Environment Agency, GSHPA, and Natural Resources Wales, strongly support ground source and water source heat pump systems. The entire process is under review. It was due to be reviewed and renewed 2 years ago, but it got delayed, and then it's been delayed again with COVID. But I've got a slide about that later on. So everything's going to be dragged into what's called the Environmental Permit Regulations. I'll call that EPR. More on EPR in a minute. So let's go through the current process. So a typical regulatory process in England and Wales is similar. You've decided that through a viability assessment, let's say, that you are sitting on a very good aquifer, and you think you're going to need boreholes, maybe 4 boreholes, abstracting water and re-injecting. So you're abstracting water out of one borehole through a heat exchanger where you dump heat into it or take heat out of it, depending on whether you're heating or cooling, and re-inject into one or more boreholes. The first step on that journey is to tell the Environment Agency, GSHPA or Natural Resources Wales, what it is you're intending to do. And in England and Wales, you issue what's called a WR32, Water Resources Section 32 application. And it tells the Environment Agency how many boreholes you think you're going to be drilling, to what depth, a rough outline of the borehole design, and a justification of why you need that water, what you're going to use it for, and the fact that it is non-consumptive. Everything that's going to be pumped out will be pumped back in again. So you issue your Section 32 application, which it's a fairly short form. It's half a dozen pages, something like that. The Environment Agency will review that. It goes to the Permit Support Centre in Sheffield first, and then goes out to a relevant officer. And that officer will, after 2 or 3 weeks, usually, issue a requirement for a water feature survey. So a water feature survey identifies other boreholes. There might be water supply boreholes, they might be other ground source boreholes, other springs, rivers, anything in the water environment that could be impacted by your proposed new boreholes. So you go out and do your water feature survey. Some of it is a desktop job, some of it is physically stomping around and knocking on doors. And you issue the results of that survey to the Environment Agency. If they accept it, they will say, right, here is your consent to drill. It is a legal document allowing you to drill the number of boreholes you said you wanted to drill and to test pump them. And during that test pumping, you will be required to monitor 1 or more boreholes on site or off site as located in your water feature survey. You do your drilling, and you do your test pumping as required on the Environment Agency consent. And you've gathered an awful lot of data in doing that about the borehole, what you found while you were drilling it, and during the test pumping. And test pumping will normally require step tests, so that's pumping the boreholes at different rates, measuring the rate that you're pumping and the effect on the water level within the borehole while you're doing it, and the effect on other boreholes while you're doing it. So you've got a great big chunk of data that you've collected during drilling and test pumping. That all has to be analysed hydrogeologically, geologically, and all put together in a report in an acceptable format to the Environment Agency, along with the data that you collected. That report and the data is sent to the Environment Agency with the abstraction license application forms and the environmental discharge permit application forms. The Environment Agency, with large, high-profile systems, may need to advertise publicly what you are intending to do. The advertising takes place in the local press and on the .gov.uk website. I'll talk about timeframes later, but the Environment Agency require a certain regulated length of time to internally consult about your application and to determine your license and permit. So that is a fairly considerable length of time and does cause some issues with some projects, as we'll see later. So, timeframes from issuing your Section 32 application to receiving the requirements for your water feature survey, that's a non-statutory timeframe. So the Environment Agency can actually take as long as they want. But as I've said, they always try to be helpful, but they do have other things to do besides. That will typically be between, I've said 4 to 6 weeks, but it's sometimes 2 to 6 weeks that they'll come back and say, yeah, we need a water feature survey. And it's typically, let's say, a 1 kilometre radius around where you're intending to drill. So you carry out the water feature survey and issue it to the Environment Agency. And again, they have a non-statutory time frame to review what you've done and to say it's acceptable and issue your consent. So they will issue a consent to drill and test pump, again, within 2 to 6 weeks, I would say, on average. It's taken longer recently because of COVID. Before that, there was flooding issues, and before that, there were drought issues. So all of these things drag staff away and can cause things to take a bit longer. So then your drilling and testing is performed to the requirements on your consent, and that's not up to the Environment Agency. That's the project issue. If it's 2 boreholes, that might take you a month. If it's a lot of boreholes, it could take you considerably longer. Analysis and data analysis and preparation of your hydrogeological report and completion of the application forms depends how urgent that is for your project. It can be done in a week or 2. Sometimes it takes a good bit longer. So completion of your application forms, that's Forms A, which is sort of administrative legal land ownership issues. Form B8, which is the technical side of things, how much water you need, why you need it, what you're using it for. The borehole design, where the water maps showing where the abstraction borehole or boreholes are and the re-injection boreholes are. And an F1, that's your financial one, how much you've got to pay for all of this. As I say, they may need to advertise, but that's generally only in very large, high-profile systems in the local press and the .gov.uk. So the determination process is a statutory timeframe, and if it's advertised, the Environment Agency have got 4 months to process your application and to get their answer back to you. The answer being a legal document, a license allowing you to abstract water, and a permit, a legal permit to allow you to put it all back in again. So the total time for an open loop application from your initial application through the drilling and testing, through your analysis, and through the regulatory Environment Agency CEPA process can take 9 to 12 months. So all open loop projects must take that into account. There are many, many benefits of open loop systems in the right place, as we've seen in our various presentations, webinars over the last few weeks. But the time frame has to be taken into account every time, because it's very, very different to closed loop. Scotland's different. They have a very different approach. I'm not going to go into it in detail here. I've put a link there, which you can look up on the GSHPA website. This will also be on YouTube, as all the other webinars are. Borehole drilling, groundwater abstraction and ground source heat pump open loop systems fall within the requirements of General Binding Rules. General Binding Rules 3 and 17. I've summarised the main points below there. So in Scotland, you can abstract pretty much any volume of water and re-inject it, provided you're not consuming more than 10 metres cubed per day. So let's say you're taking 1,000 metres cubed a day abstraction. Most ground source heat pump systems will re-inject 1,000. But so you can do that in Scotland without going through the whole process that I've talked about that the Environment Agency and NRW require. So it is easier in Scotland. There are other issues, but in general, open loop systems, the regulation of are more straightforward. Other things in the general binding rules: chemical composition of abstracted water cannot be altered, i.e. you can't put anything in, or you can't take anything out of that water. Pipework and other equipment must be maintained to prevent leakage. The activity mustn't be within 250 metres of any other abstraction of water required for human consumption. And Dave Banks was talking about mine workings last week, but if abstractions from mine workings take place, care should be taken not to oxidise the water to prevent precipitation of various dissolved minerals. So those are part of the general binding rules. As I say, there's a link there to pick up a lot more information than that, but in general, I would say the system is much more straightforward and user-friendly in Scotland. I think water source heat pumps actually requires or deserves its own webinar, but just in brief, the regulation of water source heat pumps is rather different. In England and Wales, the process, as with boreholes, is also covered by the water resource regulations for taking water out of a river or a dock, and an environmental permit to put it back in again. Again, the Environment Agency, NRW and SHPA have different ways of doing this. Because you're not drilling boreholes and you're not test pumping, the system is rather different. With water source heat pumps, you make a pre-application. You tell the Environment Agency what you want to do via forms A and B and D, in the case of SHPA, to summarise what you're going to do. What hardware you're going to put in the river. So that's the pump, the pumps, the intakes, the discharge pipe work, the defenders, and then any other gubbins that is going to go into the river. The flow rates you're looking for to satisfy the heating and cooling requirements of your heat pumps, and the justification of why you need those flow rates. And in some cases, with rivers in the UK, temperatures can get down into low single figures during winter, which means that the delta T through your heat exchanger might have to reduce significantly compared to sort of autumn and spring. So your flow rates might need to be a good bit higher when the river temperatures are very low, and that has to be part of your application. The Environment Agency and SHPA need to know the peak flow rates that you're going to take and why you need it. So you send all of that information in with the supporting maps and identification of where it's going to go and outline designs. You will then be sent an in principle letter accepting that what you've asked to do. That letter will also detail all of the water resource, water quality, and flood risk issues that the Environment Agency and SHPA might perceive at that particular location. Obviously, every river is very different in terms of flow rate and ecology, and so the letter that you will receive will be site specific, and the requirements set out in that letter must then be resolved. That might require some thermal modelling to show how the water temperature might change in the river as a result of your system. It might, in some cases, require ecology surveys or other surveys, such as measuring the depth of the river, confirming seasonal flow rates, confirming seasonal temperatures. So there's a fair bit of background work to do, but all doable. And as I say, the Environment Agency are actually there to help. They are supportive of these systems because they're non-consumptive. You're just using the water to go through a heat exchange process. So in response to the in principle letter, you then issue a full application with supporting analysis, reports, outline designs, maps, etc., etc. That all gets issued to the agency, to SHPA, along with your payment of your admin fees, which in England is about £6,000. I forgot to say for open loop systems, the price is about the same. The price at the moment for an abstraction license application is a grand sum of £135. For a permit to re-inject, it's £5,800. That's all about to change, but those are the fees which the Environment Agency, under the strategic review of charging, has decided actually cost them to process. So that's water source heat pumps, a very quick flyby. So change is afoot. What is about to happen? Change has been planned to the abstraction licensing system for quite a long time. The Environment Agency do understand that it's a clumsy fit to have a license to take water out of the ground and a permit to put it all back in again. So the plan is to bring it all into the EPR system, which is a risk-based approach. There will be a consultation on this process, almost certainly in 2021, issued by DEFRA, so look out for that. And the changes, hopefully, will be, with a following wind, maybe late 2022 or probably more likely 2023. So the main changes will be that abstraction and injection will be included as two activities within a single permit. So you won't have a license and a permit, you'll just have a permit with two activities on it, and the normal sort of constraints and conditions that you might have at the moment on your abstraction license or permit. The time frame for application and processing of that will be similar to now, but again, that will be part of the consultation. One big change will be that at the moment, your abstraction license is time limited, and that has proved to be a major hurdle for some developers, where they're building a large new public building that is going to be there for 50 odd years, and the time limit on the abstraction license to run the ground source heat pump system for it is going to be limited to a maximum of 12 years. Your first one may be considerably less. Time limits at the moment are controlled by the catchment that you're within. It's a catchment abstraction management system common time limit. So abstraction licenses are limited to a maximum of 12 years. Permits are not time limited. That's a big benefit. I think it'll provide more confidence, but there will be reviews at the same sort of common end date for each catchment. And as I say, permits are risk-based, and so that review will review whether your ground source system or water source heat pump system poses a risk to the environment. Now, ground source heat pump systems and WS and water source are non-consumptive and considered to be very low risk, as they should be, because they are very low risk to the environment, and therefore these possibly 12 yearly reviews should really be a box ticking exercise. Some other differences is that you will be able to make some changes and change some aspects of a permit and vary some aspects of your permit online without having to go through the sort of the variation process with the Environment Agency or SEPA. Discharge exemptions for smaller systems and very low risk systems will remain. So you might have a permit for abstraction and you will have an exemption for your re-injection. So that's even better, because there is no time limit or review on that at all. And I suppose the bad news is that almost certainly the prices will go up. As I said, abstraction applications currently cost £135. Permit is, I think it's 5,800 for discharge or re-injection. So the EPR single permit combined cost is likely to be higher. So that's subject to the consultation on EPR and the strategic review of charges, which is also ongoing. So I think in all, it's good news. The EPR system should be a better, slightly more streamlined system. It will cost a bit more, but that time limit on the abstraction license has proved to some of the projects we've been involved in, and I know others will say the same. It's been a real bugbear to developers, so that should help. Okay, well, I think that's about all I've got to say on regulation at the moment. As I say, it's a very quick fly through. It's quite a big area to talk about, and at some point, I think myself or someone will do a separate one on water source heat pumps and the the design and regulation of those. So, thank you very much for listening in, and please fire away with any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I might just make a couple of clarifications for those who are relatively new to ground source. What John has been talking about are both an open loop, what we call water source heat pumps, which are water pumps. In other words, lakes or bodies of water where you are abstracting water to a heat pump and then re-injecting it back to the body of water. And then obviously on the borehole ones that John was talking about are what we call open loop ground source, where we're abstracting from an aquifer and re-injecting to the aquifer. It's just to make the distinction between there are much more stringent Environment Agency requirements for both of those than there are for closed loop. I was actually crashed out of the system at one point, but I don't think there were any technical questions in there. If you did ask a technical question, could you repose it? But I don't think I missed any. John, perhaps I could just pop a few questions. One is there a very straightforward initial approach to the agencies to pop the question, would a water source open loop system or a ground source open loop system even be possible in this particular location? In other words, can you get a go, no go, don't even worry about it, don't even think about it response from the agency before you start?
Right, good question. That's the sort of thing which I guess a number of consultants that are members of GSHPA get asked, and that's, we look at that and say, right, yeah, we think it's going to be okay here. But to actually get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, you should go through the pre-application process. For boreholes, the Section 32 application is an actual that's the first step of regulation. You can go back a step and pay the Environment Agency for their view and initial impressions of your ideas through the pre-application process. It's a chargeable exercise, not hugely so, but yes, you can obtain an initial view, but I'm sure many caveats are attached to it as to whether the Environment Agency think a scheme is suitable for the proposed location. I have to say that, like I've said a couple of times, open loop borehole systems and water source systems are non-consumptive. They are very low risk, so therefore the vast majority of systems proposals are suitable, provided you've got the right advice in the first place as to whether the water is available from rocks beneath your feet, and whether your river is suited in terms of sufficient flow and suitable temperature for your scheme. But yeah, if you want to get it from the agency or SHPA, you can pay for a pre-application.
Okay, thank you. Is there a requirement when you're talking about an open loop aquifer system? Do you have to demonstrate to the agency the ability to re-inject? In other words, in the testing regime that they require, do they ask you to demonstrate the ability to re-inject?
Yes. So your consent that you obtain from the agency or SHPA for some systems will ask you to do consumptive test pumping. So that's pumping from a borehole to waste, generally to a sewer, sometimes to a river or a nearby brook. So you are testing that the borehole can physically give you, sustainably give you the flow rate that you want to have. That will be a step test, as I think I mentioned, where you're pumping a borehole at different rates and monitoring the effect on the borehole. And then there'll be a constant rate test, 24 hours, 48 hours, sometimes a lot longer, where you're pumping to waste at a constant rate and monitoring the impact on your borehole and other boreholes in the scheme and nearby. And then finally, you do a re-injection test where you're pumping from one or more boreholes and re-injecting into the others. So you're doing a full-on operational test, as it will be when the system is actually running up and running in anger. So yes, you do have to do that testing. You have to demonstrate that you can abstract and re-inject and send the data to the Environment Agency to prove it.
I've got a question here from Chris Davidson. Could you say a few words about thermal balance and the actual Environment Agency position versus some of the misconceptions in the minds of particularly consulting engineers, please? I think that might complement something I was going to ask, which is, at what point is there a requirement to demonstrate to the agencies any level of thermal modelling or not?
Okay, well, the Environment Agency in general, and SEPA and the other guys, will always encourage thermal balance. A system that is fully heating or fully cooling has to be shown, well, large systems anyway, in areas that have other groundwater users, other ground source heating users, has to be shown that it will not impact greatly on nearby users. Your license and permit don't regulate your thermal impact on anyone. But as part of the process, you do have to quantify your megawatt hours of heating, megawatt hours of cooling. And if it is hugely out of balance, then yes, the Environment Agency will ask you to model one way or another how that plume of cooled or heated water will respond, where it's going to go, and who or what it might impact upon. So it's not written down on your abstraction license or your injection permit, but it is with larger schemes, it most certainly can be part of the process to prove that your system is sustainable and is not impacting on existing users, existing licensed users of water and existing ground source systems. We've been asked only a few times over the years to provide thermal models. Hugh was talking about this in his webinar 2 weeks ago, so have a look at that for the detail. But I think, as more of these systems come into play, especially in urban areas, then sure, modelling of balance and modelling of breakthrough between boreholes will become more commonplace. I have to say, it's not the Environment Agency's job to regulate whether your system is going to work or not. If you put two boreholes 20 meters apart and try to do a fully heating and cooling system with it, it will be discouraged by the Environment Agency, but it's not their job to design it so that it will work. That's your job.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I've got no further questions showing up on my chat screen. I hope I haven't missed anybody out. I think this has been very useful to raise the awareness of, as soon as you step into larger scale open loop systems, You must be aware that you need to be talking to the environmental agencies, and that you are in for some upfront costs before you can go back to your client to say that this is a definite goer. Please bear that in mind when you start to get engaged in larger open loop systems, either borehole based or surface water based. We continue this theme of webinars with the last one associated with open loop systems next week. Chris Davidson will be talking about issues associated with the above ground, so the heat pump side of life associated with open loop ground source and water source heat pump systems. So I hope you'll be able to join us again then, same time, same place on the 17th of December. And thanks to everyone for setting this up and for those who've logged in to share John's experience with us.
Thanks very much, everybody.